they're not disclaiming that you can't talk about the other organization's data, right? So whether you're following the Information Governance Initiative, whether you're doing the information privacy, whoever you're following that's designing what you need to put in your technology toolkit, it can vary from person to person, whether it's 17 tools, whether it's 15 tools. I kind of put things into 10 buckets. And because I think people like top 10 lists, they like 10 things, right? And so usually I use a chart like this when I go into my clients to say, where are you on this? Do you have these things in your bucket? And if you don't have them in your bucket, how are you going to go through and how are you going to start addressing them? And it's really, there have been a couple articles just recently, particularly Law Technology News, I was talking to Dawn about it last night, was talking about how difficult it is for the smaller organizations that don't have a person that has their name on the door to be in charge of something, to handle things. So you look at a list like this and you go, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Well, that's why you have an Anne, that's why you have all of us up there. But you know, how are we going to put all of these pieces together to ensure that I'm meeting the needs of the information governance strategy for the firm that protects me from a risk, because I really believe risk is the bigger piece that's driving the pie right now. And how am I going to get there from here? So it becomes a quite difficult challenge if you don't have the right people in place, but it is not a strategy for just staying still. So when we were pulling this program together, you know, this was our consensus, right? I mean, this was Dawn's thing. Dawn, you want to kind of talk about some of the things that we have up here that we're addressing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get into regulation and compliance in a second, and obviously that's, being in a heavily regulated industry, that's one of my primary concerns, but really I think it comes down to trust too. I mean, we're in a heavily commoditized industry as well. I mean, a bank's a bank. You know, when you look at it, the thing you have is that relationship with your customers, and I saw an interesting study from Edelman, that's a marketing firm, and they indicated that banks were one of the least trusted industries out there. I think it was 52%, which is, you know, slightly more trusted than not. But I think they said until you crack into the 60s, you know, that's not a very good score. So we're on tenuous ground as it is, and you know, if you have one of these data breach events, Lynn kind of indicated that people are walking away. So, you know, protecting our customers' information is of the utmost importance to continuing to do what we do.
Sunil, what do you think about legal's role? Like, where are you seeing that we have to support the rest of the world?
I think all of these are very vital in terms of what we do within our profession as we work out our, you know, roles within our organizations. And I think that, you know, certainly the main drivers today are currently, whether it's cybersecurity risk, litigation holds, other sort of compliance risk, whatever. Those are always the big and heavy ones we think of, largely because perhaps of our backgrounds, whether it's lawyers or other things, we tend to try and manage risk. But one of the little boxes that we've put up there, one of the images, I think business value is something we should also make sure we keep our eye and focus on. There's a tremendous amount of information that we're sitting on as in Don's organization that can help them generate new businesses, new revenues, new markets, and we should not lose sight of that. So at the same time that we're focusing on the negative aspects of why we need information governance in terms of managing that risk and those costs, we also need to make sure that we look at the positive side of it and the value that we can get out of it.
Absolutely. I think, you know, and that's like the big drive into, you know, artificial intelligence and legal analytics. I mean, you're seeing that every day. I was on a panel at ILTA and we talked about the artificial intelligence, and really it just all dovetails together. All of these pieces dovetail together. John, what are your viewpoints? If you could choose your pieces up there that you would say we need to pay attention, or if you wanted to rank them?
Well, sure. To dovetail onto what Sunil said, I think the business value case that you can generate internally is going to be the key, whether you're a legal department or you're a law firm, for affecting change within your organization. I think law firms and some legal departments feel that they're exempt from the data security and privacy world. A lot of it's not going to happen to me. Some large law firms have been hacked, and that's been in the news. The Attorney General in the state of New York has had meetings with large law firms to discuss the risks with their law firms for having data stolen, insider trading, things like that. But the one slide that I insisted on here was the audit part of it, because clients like PNC are now auditing their outside law firms. And from the bottom line of a law firm, if you're not able to get past the vendor procurement department of a large client, then the law department at that client will have no authority to hire you whatsoever. Or they'll have to come to you and have that really awkward conversation that says, you know, you didn't pass our audit and we're going to have to kick you off our preferred vendor list. That is a very powerful tool internally to motivate your partners to get on board with making real changes in addition to the business value.
Absolutely, and I see that happening all the time, and I have this discussion. I'm like, have you guys gotten any audits yet? Oh, no, we're fine. I'm like, oh, no, you're not. Oh, no, you're not. It's a matter of time before you are audited. And I was at a session in New York, giving a session with another vendor, and I asked them, like, how many people have been audited? And it was maybe a room of 100 law firms, small to mid-size, some AM 200s, I wouldn't say many AM 100s. And like maybe 8 people raised their hands, and the other vendor, it was a guy from Nuance, goes, just wait, the rest of you, you know. And those of you, those 8 of you, how pleasant was that experience? There wasn't anybody that had a positive look on their face. So it really isn't a strategy that you ignore it. There has to be some way, even whether you're hiring outside people, whether you're leveraging the information you have internal, you are not exempt from anything. Right, you're not exempt, and regardless of what, you know, Dawn's organization is going to say, or your corporate client's going to say, then you have all of these regulatory people that are telling you what you got to do, right? And if you are in any of these industries and you're in any of the verticals that you're representing, where is your client base? If your client base is falling under any of these pieces, and whether it's energy, I mean, these were just a sampling, you're really in bad shape if you haven't started moving forward on this, right? So we thought, because the change, you know, we've all had such major change, you know, and I'm total, straight up and down legal. And the biggest change that I've seen and I've witnessed over the past couple of years is watching where corporate legal is now the tail wagging the dog, right? We always came back to them and said, oh, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And they're like, we're in charge now. And I think it's really important to hear from someone like Dawn what that means to you. And how many of you are here are aligned with a law firm? Okay, and how many of you are aligned with corporate legal? Okay, good. I thought it was really important that you understand, and my clients laugh, I'll say, you know, you're called a vendor. And they're like, what do you mean I'm called a vendor? They have no idea that corporate legal calls you a vendor. And they're like, no, we're a law firm. No, you're a vendor. You're a vendor just like the air conditioning guy. You're a vendor. So we listened as we were preparing for this to Dawn, and we thought that it was really important for you to hear the viewpoint coming from internal and corporate legal and what they're doing at PNC.
Yeah, I mean, John kind of hit the nail on the head that we're really starting to treat law firms like we would any other service provider in the organization. For a long time, they were exempt, and we sort of went outside the procurement and the enterprise third-party management programs and just hired who we needed for what we needed them for, and didn't really think much more about it. But, you know, we're at the point where we have the saying that you can outsource the process, but you can't outsource the risk. And Lynn sort of alluded to that in her keynote. You know, we're sending some of the most sensitive data to these firms, and we're not really doing our homework as far as what their controls are. And we spend so much time sort of hardening our own perimeter, but the perimeter extends to those third-party service providers. And if you're not doing your due diligence, then you're putting yourself at great risk. So we're really not going to have a choice at this point. We have to go out and do these audits, and as John said, I mean, if we have firms that can't measure up, you know, no matter how good they are at the legal side of it, we're just not going to be able to continue to do business with them. So, you know, I think that the positive thing is that there are a lot of ways to comply these days. The cost of compliance, I think, is coming down because you have providers like a Microsoft or an Amazon or other hosting services that can help you kind of meet some of these requirements, where before you might have to build out this huge infrastructure. Maybe in the small and mid-sized world that wouldn't have always been possible.
Right. And so I guess the call to action is get your ducks in a row, get that started. You know.
Absolutely.
You know, so.
Well, if I could just
absolutely.
If I could just add to Don's point, for me, the one key, both with helping clients and internally on the vendor management side, is helping clients understand the contractual obligations that are in agreements, whether it be in the retainer letter, whether it be in the guidelines that a company would give to you, so that you're understanding what their requirements are and what they're going to be looking for when they're actually conducting an audit. Or if you're the customer, if you're the client, understand where you fit in what I say the food chain. There's going to be customers that are going to want to come and audit you because you're providing services or you're providing goods, but then also you have your vendors that you're servicing. So you're going to want to be able to go and be able to audit those vendors on behalf of your customers that are auditing you. So you have to understand how that flows, and you have to have the contractual right to audit a service provider of you in your contract, or else they're going to push back and they're going to say our data security is private and you'll be touching other people's information. We just can't have you wandering around our facilities. So I do a lot of negotiations on behalf of clients to get those clauses into their contracts so that we can pass our own audit, meaning the law firm or the client can pass their own audit because they have the contractual right to go down as far down the stream as necessary to ensure data privacy and security controls are being followed.
Right.
And just to add on one point here, I think Lynn used a very critical word in her presentation earlier, and I think that word is holistic, right? So whether you look at the overall situation, however you look at it, you have to look at it in a holistic manner. One of the slides we had earlier, as Ann talked about, like the top 10, I mean, looking at all the different data sources, you need to look at everything in a holistic fashion. And that has to be not just like what are your sources of information, but also what vendors and companies are you working with, because they're also handling your information. Whether it's the records management company who's taking boxes or cloud storage or whoever it might be, you really have to look at everything from an overall perspective, and you have to manage it from that perspective. Otherwise, there are going to be chinks in your armor, and that's where whether it's a breach or whatever might happen, that's where you're going to fail and where you're going to lose your data. So you have to keep your eye on the ball. And like the old joke goes about how do you eat an elephant, you do it one bite at a time.
Right.
And you just have to start doing it.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I find people just like paralysis by analysis. They're just,
Right.
You've got to do all of these things. Just start. If you already know you're deficient, find some area to start. Right? We had an interesting, one of Dawn's initiatives that happened at PNC this year was an interesting, about how, to Lynn's point this morning, about we keep data for forever and we put ourselves at extreme risk. And this, I thought, was an interesting thing that part of the team in the enterprise side of PNC provided us with this, right? Dawn, you want to talk a bit to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is pretty typical of what you would see, but 70% of the data that you're paying to store and it's sitting out there, and who knows what it is, 10% cat pictures, it looks like, a lot of useless data. It's just sitting out there waiting to be, well, discovered.
Discovered.
And, you could do yourself a favor by cleaning that up.
Get rid of it.
Get rid of it. There's no need.
Right. So I think this is a traditional thing, and it's part of that assessment. Have outside people come in and give you an audit. Like how are you doing before your client gives you that audit? Maybe you might want to know a few things here and there. To
this point, if you haven't read about it, you can find it probably pretty easily. BAE Systems, about a year to 2 years ago, did a process where they were sitting on 5 petabytes worth of information. And they performed an analysis. They looked at the data that they had. They selected 2 petabytes for analysis. And all they did was a file name, file metadata analysis. They didn't even go into the content. And based upon that analysis, they were able to eliminate 900 terabytes worth of data just by looking at very basic information. Now, that process took a year to 2 for them to actually get through everything in terms of defining what data to look at, analyzing it, and then destroying it, defensively destroying it. But when you talk about 70% rot, you look at a company like BAE that was able to eliminate almost 20% of their data in just a single first pass.
Right.
Yeah, and you're paying twice. I mean, you're paying to store it, and then the e-discovery costs. If you're into that, maybe let's say you're in the pharma industry or some other heavily litigated industry, you're going to have so many false positives, and you're just going to be paying for nothing. Right. There's no point.
And so this just goes back to that wheel, right? So this was a project they undertook because they knew that they needed to get rid of this data because they were building this audit process. So I thought that was we tried to use, when Nick was giving us instructions, he said, we want to see statistics. So we just pulled some statistics together. I asked each of our members to give me 1 or 2. I thought this was an interesting one. I think, did this come from you, Sunil?
Yes, that's correct. So,
I think we need to talk about understanding some of this.
Right, and going to what Don was just talking about, sort of like paying double for it. I mean, really, when you think about how most companies are organized, not only do you have your original production environment, you know, your active data set, and of which 70% is ROT, as Don spoke to, but then you have the backup of it. Then if you've actually got your system structured in a proper place, so you've got your DR system that has the same data. Then if you have your system set up properly in place, you also have a business continuity system, which means you have yet another copy of it. And your business continuity system has a DR capability as well in case your primary should go down. So you really are you really have 4 sets of every document that you create. And so your 70% now gets multiplied. And so your costs, this is just you know, for a company that has about 500 employees and the amount of data that they're carrying. And that's trivial compared to what larger organizations are carrying these days. They're spending tens of millions of dollars a year maintaining servers that they no longer need, maintaining backups that they no longer need. And you can just eliminate that by reducing your ROT.
Yeah.
Well, and then just real quick on this, so the one system that a lot of companies have employed over the last 10 years is archive and journaling systems. So you have yet another location where you have tons of information that you're hopefully accessing when you have litigation, but it's there. And then another area that I wanted to point out, since we're talking about moving legal forward, is the law firm environment. So I had a conversation with a client just the other day about what they're doing to manage information governance at their law firms, because there are some savvy attorneys in the world that will ask for old discovery responses if they know that there was a particular case that they found involving your client's data, and now you have this information, and you probably have it in those 5 locations at your law firm in addition to the 5 locations at the client. So there's a lot of data out there.
Absolutely, and I think that goes back to, you know, we are in the legal vertical, we're dinosaurs. We do things the hard way. If there's a hardest way to do it, we've done it, right? We don't necessarily put emphasis. You have executive committees that feel that, you know, a server is got a 10 to 15-year life value. You know, like, you know, I'll go in and say, oh.
Not only your law firms, but also think about if you have e-discovery service providers, if you're giving them copies, you know, when the matter's over, make sure that that's being destroyed as well.
Yeah.
So when we had some other things, these are, you know, about litigation spend, you know, what are we doing? And again, it opens up to what John said, right? That someone knows that someone knows you're not on top of your game, they're going to start asking for that stuff.
Absolutely.
Right? This was Sunil's, you know, he said, oh, everybody give me your quote. And I thought that was an interesting one, because that does predict where you are. You are going to be doomed, right? I said, oh, Sunil, where did that come? It goes, oh, those are lessons learned. That's from me. So my favorite phrase is, you really don't know what you really don't know, right? Because until you were in that problem, you didn't know how bad your problem was.
That's exactly right. And I've always been, you know, a history buff, and you know, one of my favorite things is that if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And this is actually, you know, what I just kind of paraphrased off of that. It's the same idea, and to what you just said. When you don't know what you're sitting on, when you have all of the dark data, as they call it, or by any other name, it's, you know, it's still the same. You don't know what your exposure is. You don't know what your risk is, and so then it starts managing you. It starts consuming you, because you are putting yourself at risk without having any clue as to what that situation might be.
And depending on what your control environment's like, you may find entire shadow IT systems that you didn't know existed. You know, if people are allowed to use Access databases or Notes databases or other things, if they're able to build their own thing.
And right next door, I apologize, right? But we've got Box is, I think, one of the sponsors of the you know, sessions that we're having here, and both for well and good, right? They are one of the companies that enable a shadow IT organization to exist within all of our companies.
Well, and don't underestimate the power of people to develop workarounds.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And, you know,
I call it going rogue. They go rogue.
Well, and that's the importance of information governance, and I think it's a good segue into the next slide with respect to being managed by your data. And you have to be able to have repeatable processes and understand where everything is, because once things go off the radar screen with respect to dark data and the other areas in the organization, when we're doing preservation analysis or an investigation with respect to preservation, we have to figure all this stuff out anew every time.
And then it leads into what Lynn was talking about. Like, if you don't know where it is, you're going to have a data breach. I was on a panel with someone from the FBI, cybersecurity, and he just kept saying, it's going to happen. You're going to get it. It's there. They're already probably inside your organization. Just wait. Just wait. So, I mean, that's a pretty high percentage. And the same thing with how much does it cost me? It's not only what happens, But then what's the cost to the bottom line, right? You know, and those are pretty big statistics.
And that's the hard cost, right? That's not even thinking about reputational damage like Lynn and Don spoke about. You know, like if PNC were to get breached, you know, what harm will they face from their customers who are not going to trust the organization and pull their money away?
Because no one wants to be above the fold on the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
Well, absolutely. And companies that are auditing their outside law firms, questions are directed to how many security incidents have you had where you've had to ramp up your incident response team. Not just have you had a data breach, but that's also on that questionnaire as well. So you have to be able to address these things.
Well, and when we were talking about this, like what buckets would we talk about, right? How do we get to ourselves to move forward with an information governance initiative? And we kind of said, you know, you need to have, kind of to what Lynn said, you need to have the right players in the room, and you need to look at it from how does it impact your law firm, if you're the law firm, and your clients, if you're supporting, you know, law firm departments. And then you have to put that technology blend into it. So depending on where you are you the technologist, then you got to work it backwards. Are you the law department? You got to work on either side of that. But in all of these, then the next row down is saying, you got to look at it from a whole bunch of different viewpoints, going back to the holistic statement, right? What is my risk? You know, how can I do the best practice in my organization? What is the very best thing for me to be doing here? And don't be sitting in a silo. Like, make sure you're finding out through the bajillion organizations that you can be a member of, what is someone else doing? How are you handling that? There are all kinds of ways to do that. And my big thing, because this is what I do for a living, is change management. You know, like, okay, we got all these rules and policies that Lynn told us not to write down. How do I make those things happen? So our team came up with some ideas on how we can move legal forward. So who wants to take this one on identifying requirements?
Sure, I'm happy to start out. So I think identifying what your end goal is very important for developing overall holistic approaches we've been using, or strategy to implementing an information governance program at your organization or improving your information governance program. And so understanding whether you're going for SOC 2 compliance or ISO 27001, some overarching goal. And then identifying with a baseline assessment where you are currently, and it may be worlds apart. And then identifying what incremental changes you may need to make from an overall strategy perspective, and then get the individuals on your team that you're going to use to make those changes, with the understanding that this is going to be a cultural change. You have to understand what the culture of your organization is and what are the push points. And I'm a big proponent of developing ROI and then having a champion internally promote the ROI of your project. And then going on a talking tour internally and talking to all the stakeholders to get them involved, bring them onto your team, and then explaining the benefits to the organization of this project. And I think without that motivation, you're going to be dead in the water.
Absolutely, and I mean, and John touched on some of these things, but it's understanding what's your culture going to accept, right, Don? Like,
yeah, I think it goes back to if you're going to lock some things down, then you need to provide proper outlets for those people to get their job done. Otherwise, they're going to find things that you probably wish they didn't find. So,
workarounds.
Yes,
right. And we've already talked about developing a roadmap. Get a plan, like get a plan, because if you don't have a plan, you're going to get punched in the face, and it's not going to work. And we talked a bit about implementing change management. That is so critical. If you are just the tech guy or the tech gal talking to someone, people will not do what they're supposed to do if you haven't explained the process to them and give them an easy pathway to accomplish that goal. Otherwise, they're going to be doing what John talked about, right? The going rogue. Oh, you didn't tell me I couldn't go this way. You just told me not to do it, but you didn't tell me how I couldn't do it. So I think the adoption goes to what John was talking about, right, John? If I keep making myself be a champion of change, I can be the cheerleader in addition to the technologist, right? Some other things that are real important, Dawn, I mean, you want to talk to us? These are the things we had to make sure that we do.
Yeah, you know, in the interest of time, I just want to harp on the team approach. It's not just an IT thing, it's not just a cyber thing. You know, I think the keynote touched on that, but you know, you could be the best CIO in the world, the best cybersecurity team in the world, but with the number of attacks that occur per day, and you could be 99.9999% effective, but something's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. If you're networked, you're going to have an incident. So I think it's just working together with all those teams internally, your records management team, legal, compliance, risk, whatever your structure is, to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row is really important.
And Lynn also talked about developing a tech committee, right? And so the lowest, my goal, and people say, why are you bringing the support staff in? They know what's going on more than the person at the top, right? Bring in the people that you're going to ask them to eat, the same dog food that you are, right? You need to bring them in and say, what do you do? And they often will say, we don't do that. Like it's not a good time to find out after you've got a plan that you didn't incorporate something or you didn't gather the right information, right, John?
What's funny is, so I have an 11-year-old daughter, and she's going to be a great lawyer someday, because no matter what the house rules are, she challenges them saying, well, Dad, that wasn't a rule of our house. And I just use that as an example because, especially in a legal environment where groups of individuals feel that the rules don't really apply to them. We were talking before about whether it be the corporate legal department being exempt from retention requirements, all kinds of things that they feel they're exempt from. Now you're putting rules on them, and they unfortunately act like little kids sometimes with respect to the rules that are being forced upon them. So without having the audit and compliance part, without testing, without looking at someone's network share file or looking at their laptop or talking to them in their annual review about information governance, housekeeping best practices, it is not going to happen. Unless you completely lock them out with permissions and controls, and then they're going to come.
Well, then they won't be able to function.
That's right.
Then they won't be able to do what they need to do on a daily basis in order to work. So you can't lock it down so tightly, but you do have to leave it open, but that leaves open the rogue element possibility as well.
And I've seen it both ways. I mean, I have a client right now where the IT team locked down everything. They can't send attachments through it, making it appear. I'm like, you can't do what? So it's, you get both ends of the spectrum. And I think one of the things that, that I'd like to talk to as a closing note here, because we're almost out of time, is this concept of this is not a one and done, right? You don't just say, okay, I got my cloud solution. You have to continually be evaluating what it is that you're putting forth, and somebody will say to me, oh, I need to get my 5-year strategy plan. Are you insane? You can have an idea of what your 5-year strategy is supposed to be, but the technologies that are going to be available today versus the technology that's available in 5 years are radically different.
As the technology changes, as workflow within an organization changes, as a culture within an organization changes, all of those times are times where you have to look and analyze, what have you put in place, what have you created, what's the framework, how does it need to be tweaked or modified in order to continue to protect the corporate investment of its information asset, how do you manage it so that you can control it and maximize its value and minimize its risk. I think we were talking about the change agent being a change agent a moment ago, and this is something that requires everybody to think about on a regular basis, not just the people who are like us who are here to try and promote it, but you have to change the mentality of the organization itself to understand the risk and the value of the information that it's sitting on. And so you need that secretary at the desk, you need the receptionist, you need the lawyers, you need the IT people. Everybody has to come together at the same table and to start thinking about it that way in order to really make this effective and functional.
Well, and framework is the word that I wanted to pick up on from what you just said, is you're building, if you think about it as you're building a framework that fits the culture of the organization, that meets the needs of the organization and the customers or clients of the organization, that is the best way to think about your approach to this project. Because I look at technology as being really plug and play. And that's a novel idea for a lot of law firms and a lot of legal departments, that you're just going to install some technology that happens to be the latest and greatest. Because even a few years ago, law firms were buying technology for a 10-year window. And right now, it's a 2-year window, maybe a 1-year window before your customers, your lawyers, are going to want to change to some other type of technology that is more efficient and best fits the needs of the organization.
Yeah, I won't do a deal over 3 years for any system. I just won't. Yeah. And one thing I want to say about the team thing before we close is you have to pick a leader. Someone has to own it. Because if you have all these people sort of being part of the process, but no one's ultimately responsible, you're in trouble. So for us, it was cyber, and we had records ended up reporting into cyber, and they're the ones who had this up. But maybe your organization, it would be records or someone different, but someone's got to be in charge.
Right. So it's really, we've given you a lot of ideas of how you can move forward. We're all of us here very passionate about making sure that legal, succeeds. That's why a lot of us speak. We want that mantra to get out there. We are looking forward to seeing you. I believe we're going to the ad lib room. Is that correct?
Next door, roundtable Q&A.
Oh, the roundtable Q&A. So we've met the end of our conversation, and we'd like to continue the conversation and have all of you join us. Bring your coffee, bring your questions, and thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to work with all of you this morning. Thank you.